Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Alpha's Arcane Bride. Episode 11. Dulsanra. 2 weeks had passed since that day. I had asked Rayhana how the night had gone, but she simply said time will tell. I could sense her pain, but at the same time, there was a determination in her. We had been planning the break-in of the coven, and it was finally time. Rayhan had set the plan and the king had demanded in, despite the fact Kiara had given birth the same night as our barbecue to 2 gorgeous little baby girls. She had gone 10 days over her predicted due date, much to the surprise of many, making the twins' pregnancy almost as long as a usual werewolf pregnancy. Rayhan didn't argue when the king had said he didn't have a say, and I knew it was because of me and Rayhana that he had agreed. Although he mocked the king for running away from father duties. They had named the elder girl Skyla Silara Rossi, from the pictures that the king had shown us with great pride that he tried to hide. I could see she had gorgeous black hair and green eyes. The younger twin was named Katalia Tamia Rossi. She had soft brown hair and dark eyes. Both were absolutely gorgeous and I could tell the Rossi gene was indeed strong. Alongside the king, Chris and Lola were also joining us. Another 10 men from Rayhan's pack had arrived too, and the king had brought 10 as well, but these were more for backup and for lookout purposes. The plan was set, and we were ready to do this. I could feel my abilities festering within me, ready to unleash hell upon all those that hurt me. We weren't going to march up to the coven's doors and ask for permission to enter, we were going to do a teleportation spell, one that was going to transport us into the main hall of the coven's castle. I had picked the date and time knowing when they would all be in the vicinity. So, the plan is, get in, seal off anyone's escape routes, and announce the truth, right? Rayhana said, adjusting her black. Pretty much. Chris said to her, like the rest of us, we were all dressed in comfortable clothing and shoes. Everyone knows the plan. We stick to it. The main thing is, to allow Magdalene and Edward to hear the truth. Reginald might be the High Elder, but Magdalene was ultimately the strongest. I said. And the rest nodded. Ready, kitten? Rayhan asked me. He looked so cute in all black jeans, t-shirt, boots and a leather jacket. His long curly hair framed his face, and those stormy grey eyes of his stared into mine. Ready? I said, placing my hands on his shoulders. I kissed his lips softly, about to pull away when he pulled me tightly against him, making me sigh. He kissed me harder, his hands digging into my waist. I knew he was worried for me, but I wasn't alone anymore. I believed in us. Let's get this done. The king said, cracking his knuckles. Ready, girls? Janina asked, holding her hands out to me. The spell was all set up, but it was going to take all 3 of us. It wasn't easy magic, and we wanted to reserve our energy for when we were inside. We were currently not too far from the castle, just outside of their radar. We placed our hands in hers as everyone took their place inside of the circle. It was only the 7 of us that were teleporting right inside. Everyone held hands and the 3 of us began chanting the spell. Power surged forth and I felt the strong pull and swoosh, everything darkening around us before I felt the jolt as we came to a stop. Instantly, I pulled my hand away from Rayhan's and Janina's, creating a barrier as several forces hit it with full power. Wow, they sure had reacted fast. Nice move, Del. Rayhana said, quickly whispering her spell and sealing the entire area in a bubble of power. The glow of her power coated the walls of the hall we were in. The Coven elders, who had been seated around a table, were now all standing, their eyes filled with anger and rage. Perfect, as assumed they were all here. All the council members were here, as were Amaria and Elena. Alongside them were Denina the Fire Witch, and Olivia, both of whom had come after me all those months ago. Only this time the tides had turned. The only person I wish wasn't here was Ames. There were a few others around, but apart from the healer woman, I didn't know the rest. For a few seconds, no one moved or spoke. The council seemed stunned as they stared at all of us. They were probably shocked that we had managed to penetrate every barrier placed on this place. Their eyes settled on Janina. Well, looks like it's a full house, the king remarked, smirking coldly, breaking the silence. What the? Ames muttered, his heart racing as he stared at our group. Our eyes met, and his were full of hate as he stared at Rayhan's hand on my waist. Oh, Ames! If only you knew who the real enemy was. I hope you have come to attest for your crimes, Janina. Magdalene said coldly. She stepped forward, whilst Amaria and Olivia instantly stepped forward next to her. I frowned. Of these witches, Olivia and Magdalene were the only ones I had hopes would listen. I could sense their emotions, as they looked at the seven of us. I have come to tell you the truth. Janina replied, staring at Magdalene. There was tension between them, I could see that, but at the same time, something told me there was more between them. There was hostility, distrust, and betrayal. Something told me these two had perhaps been friends long ago. Kill them. Don't fall for their words. Reginald ordered. Agatha, Amaria, Eldridge, and Elena all stepped forward. Let us speak. If you have nothing to hide, then there is no harm in listening. Rayhan growled, his alpha aura rolling off him in waves. Stay out of it, mutt. Samson hissed. You stay out of it, or I cut you to pieces. The king growled back venomously. His aura was rolling off him in waves just like every other of the wolves there, and together they were a force to be reckoned with. We left, but the fact that we came back here means something. We could have snuck in, you know that. We're here because we want a meeting with the entire council. Rayhan said coldly. His words were sharp and clear, his eyes blazing green as he stared at Edwards and Magdalene. Exactly, I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I was framed and driven from here. Janina said quietly. She is a snake, Magdalene. Samson spat, yet his face was pale. I felt the shift in me and, smiling coldly, looked at him. Gasps filled the room and I raised an eyebrow. Want to share the actual truth about how I was born? I hissed. Magdalene looked sharply between them all, and I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. We all know the story, some creature of darkness trapped Samson. Elena hissed. Wrong. I snapped. There are always two sides to a story. Edward said, frowning. Everyone sit down. No. Reginald thundered. I am High Elder and what I say goes. Kill them. Look at her. Associating with this. Now. I shouted, glancing at Rayhana. The four wolves with us shifted as they lunged at those trying to attack. Rayhan knocked Zelda aside, the smell of blood filling the air. I chanted a spell, hearing Rayhana chant the same. Our focus was on the culprits alone. The rest would keep everyone at bay and Janina would handle Magdalene. You should have died in the womb. Samson spat as he ran at me. I blasted him back, wrapping the magical chains around him. I was only going to pin them down. As for the witches, I flicked my wrist as Amaria chanted a spell. Rayhan's large wolf knocked her back, growling dangerously, cutting off her half-cast spell as I jumped out of the way of the blast of water that had rushed at me. Rayhan's anger was raging around him, and it was almost as if I could see it. He growled at her, slamming her to the ground, and I knew if it wasn't for me, he would have cut her to pieces already. I wanted to be the one to deal with my so-called family. I finished the spell and bound her with chains made of magic. I wasn't sure it would hold for long as she was a strong witch, but we didn't need too long. I made sure her mouth was covered, we didn't need them casting any more spells. I looked around to see that we had those who were the most dangerous bound, whilst the rest were held back by a barrier Rayhana had created. Magdalene and Olivia were the only ones that no one had touched. They had made a barrier around a few of their people, a barrier that Ames and Edward were behind, along with a few others. Just listen to what we have to say. Rayhan said coldly. I bent down, grabbing his rucksack and tossing him a pair of joggers, my cheeks burning with annoyance as I saw several women's eyes fall on him despite the situation. Ugh, how were wolves so shameless? He simply pulled them up, tying the string. He glanced at me, smirking slightly, before turning back to Magdalene. We haven't killed any of your people yet. All we want is one chance to show you the truth. He said coldly. The display of power and dominance was clear in his words. If it were up to me, I'd kill everyone who hurt Dulsanra here and now, but for you to get the picture we haven't. Not yet anyway. I don't understand, Magdalene said icily. Yeah, well then sit down and pay attention, class has commenced. The king added. I dared not turn, knowing he was probably as Rayhan had been. Fine, speak. Magdalene hissed. And put on some trousers. Now I don't want to. He shot back. Uncle. Rayhan whined. I sighed, as Rayhan glared at his uncle. Seriously? He muttered. I shook my head, and Janina massaged her temples. I will start with why I ran away back then. I wasn't in the wrong about anything. It wasn't just because I wanted freedom. Janina said. I ran because I witnessed something I never should have. I discovered something no one wanted me to. What was it? Edward asked quietly. Magdalene's power was on the brink of her fingertips, and I knew she was just waiting to react if anyone tried to make a move. I stayed ready too, and I knew so were the wolves around me. Lola was at my back with Rayan to my side, both on alert. Chris and the king were watching Rayhana's back. The room was silent, all eyes on Janina, who took a deep breath and began telling them exactly what she had told us back in the cavern. Dulsanra, it had been painful, but I had kept my eyes averted when she had shared her memories with the room using a spell. I kept my eyes on Rayhan, who took my hand, kissing it gently as he tried to keep my attention on him. The pain as those events were described once more. It hurt so much. Remembering my mother hurt. Even if she wasn't human, she was a being. That's, Magdalene whispered. It isn't true. These are lies. Implanted in her mind by herself. Reginald spat. Then how about we read Dad's memories and yours? She hasn't had a chance to implant anything in your minds, right? Ames asked quietly, making me look up sharply. Do it. Edward said to Olivia, who nodded and walked towards Reginald. Olivia. I am the High Elder. There are serious consequences for disobeying me. Do it. Magdalene whispered coldly. Don't believe it, there was more to it. Samson said, his face was white. Shut it. We will get to your crimes soon enough. Rayhan said quietly, but the dark look in his eyes made my heart thunder. Something told me Samson would not make it out tonight, and I wasn't worried about it. The people in the room were hushed. Fear, panic, and confusion swirled around them, festering within them and so clear that everyone's emotions were molding as one. The hushed whispers were spreading, and with it the distrust towards the elder was clear. I closed my eyes when Reginald's screams subsided and his memories played in the room. I felt Rayhan place his hands on my ears, and I looked up at him as most of the sound was drowned out. I rested my head on his chest, not wanting to hear the anguished cries and sobs my mother. A creature that didn't even have the same mental capacity as us, it was disgusting that they had used her like that. Fresh tears threatened to spill, but I refused to allow them. When the scene changed, Rayhan removed his hand, and I turned. We could see him talking to Eldridge and Samson. Find Janina and kill her. She knows far too much. He was saying. He looked a lot younger here. Yet, she needs to die, Samson agreed. She's strong, what if she evades us? Eldridge spat. If she was here, she would be one of the appointed ones. She is strong. I will soon be appointed a High Elder. We will find her, it's all lies. Samson cut in, but no one listened as the scene shifted to him and Eldridge planning to trap me with their son. Before it shifted once again to him and Samson talking in a dark, rainy street. We should keep it. What if, when she's older, she has some powers? We can't call it a complete failure. Reginald whispered, holding a bundle in his arms. It took me a few seconds to realize it was me. I can't take it. What will the council think? Samson hissed. Nothing. They will think you were seduced, and then you kept an eye on her and saved your child from her before she killed it. Reginald answered icily. That is an order, Elena. She won't forgive me. Of course she will, she has no choice. You accepted her even though she was a widow. Take her and choose any lie to tell your family. She will believe it. Reginald said. We can both agree that you had fun with the demon. I almost felt sick at those words, and I wasn't the only one, as all eyes turned on Reginald and Samson. Elena's included. My heart was pounding, and I knew that no matter how many people I had killed unintentionally in life, Samson was one I would do so willingly. I was going to be the one to end him myself. A few more memories played out, and everything I knew and Janina had told us, was revealed. The scene shifted and Reginald started struggling. What did this scene include that he didn't want us to know? We need her for the plan. Without her abilities, we may not win against the mutts now. Reginald thundered. Before we could probe further into his memories, the entire ground shook violently, throwing Olivia backwards. My eyes snapped to Eldridge, her eyes blazing as she broke her restraints. Enough is enough, she hissed. I jumped back as the entire ground began to crack. Rayhan grabbed me by the waist and jumped just as the ground gave way. Don't let them get away, Magdalene thundered. Amaria. I snapped my head towards Amaria, who was staring at Samson with an uncertain look in her eyes. My heart skipped a beat. Would she realize her mistake? The spell that bound them broke. The ground crumbling beneath us was enough to break our concentration. Everything was in chaos. Even when Rayhan placed me on a safe spot, I cast a spell focusing on the ground. Where was Eldridge anyway? It had to be her. For her to actually cast such an immense spell meant she had it set up beforehand, because the Coven's castle was woven with magic. They had indeed planned ahead. Zelda and Danina were fighting with Janina. Rayhana was fighting against Elena and 3 other witches with her uncle. Magdalene was shouting something as she tried to steady the ground. You won't live after that. Samson hissed from behind me just as Rayhan grabbed him, slamming him against the wall behind you. You mean you won't? After everything you've done, it's still not enough. What you put Dulsanra through. No amount of pain will ever be enough. Rayhan said coldly. Rayhan. I want to deal with him, I said quietly, placing my hand on his back. Dulsanra. I am still your father. There is nothing you can do. I looked into those cold blue eyes. How was he possibly my father? Our eyes met, and I didn't care about the havoc behind me. The ground was still shaking, and a fleeting glance told me things were getting out of control. But I was going to do this quickly. I wasn't going to waste precious time on someone like him. You were never my father. When you sold me, it was the final straw, and I realized I had no one. But even then, I decided to survive for me, and I'm glad because if I hadn't I wouldn't have met Rayhan. Go to hell, Samson. I hope you're punished for all the crimes you commit. I raised my hand, and flames blazed around him. May you rot in the flaming pits of hell for eternity, I whispered, turning away from his body that burned with flames. His shrieks pierced the air, the smell of burning flesh was strong. However, I didn't care. In fact, his screams of agony were satisfying. I slowed the flame down, making sure he met his death slowly and painfully. These flames were from my mother's side. No magic spell would put them out. Samson didn't deserve redemption. I glanced back at him, watching his skin melt off, no longer able to scream as the pain overcame him. I felt nothing, I hated him. I watched everyone fighting and trying to contain themselves. The entire castle was shaking, and certain parts of the ceiling were caving in. To my surprise, I saw Amaria trying to hold it up. Dulsanra, help me, she said, her voice strained. I was about to go to her, but Rayhan grabbed my arm. I don't trust her. I know, but I'll be fine. Lola! I shouted, seeing a huge part of the stone fall towards her. She jumped aside just as the chunk of the ceiling crashed to the floor. We need to get everyone out. Judgment can wait. The building is collapsing. I shouted. Everyone make your way out. Magdalene shouted. Samson's writhing had stopped, yet he was still breathing as he slowly burned to death. Soon his heart will stop too. Our eyes met, but I knew he couldn't see me. He was in far too much pain. I raised my arms, ready to keep the ceiling up when I saw Ames's leg trapped under a large boulder down below. Rayhan, help my brother. I'm not leaving you, kitten. He shouted back, knocking a large stone aside. The sheer force of the magic all around was making it difficult for anyone to move or make sense of everything. For a moment, I wasn't sure who was on whose side. The air was thick with dust, sand, and rubble. Rayhan, please. After a moment of hesitation, Rayhan nodded, shifting as he ran towards Ames. I closed my eyes, focusing before I raised my arm, summoning a huge surge of power, blasting all of the rubble and dirt outwards as I blew the entire roof off the building. Well, I heard the king murmur. I thought you'd manage that. But in the process, you forgot to watch your back, dear sister. Amaria's voice hissed from right behind me. My head snapped back as she made to plunge a dagger into me. A loud growl rang from behind us, as both Lola and Rayhan knocked Amaria backwards. I flinched when I heard the sickening crunch of her head. I really was naive. There was no way she would change. This is why I'm not leaving you. Rayhan growled, shifting back. We need to get out of here. The entire place is coming down. He lifted me up bridal style, as Lola's wolf grabbed Ames before the entire side of the building crumbled down where he had been moments earlier. I didn't argue. He leapt from the castle as more parts crumbled down. We need to make sure they don't escape. I shouted. They won't. Stay here. Rayhan said, placing me down before he rushed inside again. I looked around. I needed to put a barrier up before someone escaped. Another ground-shaking blast knocked me off my feet, and I tumbled over, before the king grabbed my pulling me up just as large cracks appeared in the earth. My heart thundered, looking at his terrifying form. His glowing red eyes looked into mine for a second before he was gone in a blur apart Zelda before he bit into her heart, destroying it. Eldridge. She was strong. This is my call. Janina hissed, chanting a spell. A large gust of wind came rushing towards the castle, and I knew she was going for the source of the spell. I looked around. Everything was a mess, but it seemed most people had stepped down. Chris was holding Rayhana, who was bleeding from her arm. The king had ripped up a few more people who had tried to attack him to pieces, growling at the rest to stay back. I looked back at the castle that was falling apart, hoping all those who were inside were now out. Amaria wasn't dead. Her heart hadn't been cut from her chest. I needed to talk to her. One final time before I pass my verdict. Looking around, I snuck inside, ducking and diving from the boulders of stone that crashed to the ground. I blasted a few away, my eyes trying to adjust and see through the cloud of dust and the falling debris, searching for Amaria. Looking for someone, little sister. Her sinister voice came from behind me before pain erupted in my head. Dulsanra, I almost fell to my knees from the pain, but I focused on my own power, letting it roll off me in waves. She was slammed away and I whirled around, glaring at her. I actually thought I'd give you a chance. I hissed. I don't need a chance, Dulsanra. I want you dead. I raised my hand before she could even stand up. Her body was dirty and she wasn't fully healed, but the hatred and anger in her eyes was clear. You killed Cheney. You killed Dad. Because of you, Dawson is dead. You destroyed our family. She hissed. I didn't know what to feel. I was truly disappointed in my so-called family. Even in the end, there was no remorse. Dulsanra. Rayhan's voice came from a distance. I had just left. I could hear the worry in his voice. It was dangerous. I needed to be quick. I looked at Amaria as she tried to contain her balance, the ground shaking violently. I'm okay, Rayhan. I'm coming. I called out before turning back to Amaria. I didn't destroy anything. It's a shame that even now, you think I'm the one in the wrong. Cheney was spelled by his own mother, and he tried to assault me. I injured him, but it was Dawson who killed him. She scoffed, dragging herself to her feet. No one would ever want to end something like you. Don't give yourself so much importance. Think what you want, Amaria. Dawson tried to force me and my mate killed him. He deserved it, and if the need arose, I'd happily kill him myself. As for Samson, for everything he did to me and my mother, he deserved so much more. I was hoping you would have even an ounce of remorse in you, but clearly not. I was a fool to even think there was hope. The anger that raged within me was blinding me, and her next words broke the fragile hold I had upon it. Dulsanra. I wish I could have snapped your head as a child. I wish I could have drowned you in boiling water. I wish, oh how I wish I could have killed you. She hissed, lunging at me, her powers whirling around her. I closed my eyes, not even bothering to utter a spell, my powers unleashed, her agonizing screams pierced the air. I opened my eyes, watching her entire body impaled with black shards of magic. I reached forward, it engulfed in flames, incinerating in my hand completely. I stepped back, my heart thundering. I had killed both my sister and father. Dawson was dead too. One by one, my abusers were being taken care of. Another piece of rubble fell, crushing half her body beneath it. I was about to turn when I heard a thud, his scent hitting me before I saw him. He growled from behind me, pulling me into his arms as another large piece of the wall fell inwards. I was managing. I said quietly, looking at Amaria's body. Even until the end, I hoped that perhaps, just perhaps, there was an ounce of regret. Let's discuss that later. Rayhan said, his green eyes blazing. I told you to stay put. He lifted me bridal style, but I didn't reply, sensing his annoyance and anger. I knew he was scared to lose me, but I was not weak. When we were finally out again, I could see the group attending to injuries or just standing around staring at the huge castle, which had once been impenetrable. They had planned for far too long. For them to have embedded every corner of the castle with magic in case the need arose. Glancing around, I realized Rayhana was the only one from our group there. What happened? I asked, my heart thundering. Eldritch, Elena, and Reginald got away. Rayhan said coldly. Uncle's gone after them. Rayhan, you're a good tracker, why I was not going to leave you in there. Besides they used a spell, he said angrily. I didn't blame him for his anger, those three needed to pay, yet I also knew half of that anger was because of me. Fear not, we will track them. Magdalene said quietly, Olivia, Lilith, and Lavania have all gone too. She raised an eyebrow before whispering a spell. A small portal opened, she slipped her hand inside and pulled out some pants, tossing them at Rayhan. Wolves, learn some modesty. She said curtly, she clearly did not like them. There's more. Rayhan said to her just as she was about to turn away. More? She asked. The way Dulsanra was treated, her truth, what you know is not anywhere close. You need to see it, and you need to be ready to deal with the consequences. Rayhan said. I think after everything we have discovered with Samson and Reginald, it is important to listen. What's more, they had a plan. One where we have no idea what it is. Edward said quietly. I agree with Elder Edwards and the Alpha, Mother. I looked up to see the healer witch approaching, and now I realized why she had looked so familiar. She resembled her mother rather a lot. To think Magdalene's daughter was a healer. Magdalene had a reputation, power, and status. If anyone was able to talk to the coven on board, it would be her. Very well, have the injured taken care of. Those who are able and want to be a part of the meeting may. Let them gather in the open grounds at the back. There, I myself, will perform the spell to read her memory. Magdalene said quietly. Everyone began moving, and Rayhan pulled me into his arms, kissing my forehead. We were getting somewhere. I looked up at Rayhan, who was frowning deeply, and my heart skipped a beat. I messed up. Rayhan. I called. He looked at me. Yet. My heart sank at the anger he was trying to contain. I looked away, frowning slightly. Nothing. What is it, Del? Nothing, I said coldly. He sighed, and I simply frowned. We should make our way to the clearing. I said curtly. Kitten. We'll talk later, Rayhan. I whispered, feeling a sting of hurt. He didn't reply, simply exhaling sharply. Taking my hand, he kissed it softly, before leading me away. I looked at the back of his head, my heart tightening. I didn't want him to be angry at me, but I also knew that no matter what, he'd still love me, and knowing that, I was not going to regret what I did. I frowned deeply, knowing that sooner or later we were going to have to talk. Rayhan, when Rayhana told me Dulsanra had run inside, the fear I felt. For the first time, I was annoyed off with her. This was meant to be done together, and she went off on her own. I get that she's strong, but I can't lose her. Does she not get that she is my entire life? The moment the side of the building collapsed, my heart almost stopped. Was she okay? I needed to get to her. That was all I could think of, and she just played it off like it was okay? It was not okay. We were all standing around in the open ground, the cloud of dust beginning to settle. Those who were able to walk around in some way were gone, so many who were too injured thanks to the collapsing building were taken elsewhere. The hostility was growing. After all, we had killed a few people in the process, but they did deserve it. Some were looking at us tentatively, others were whispering, the other third of them seemed hesitant and curious. Janina was quiet. I knew she wasn't happy that the others got away. Uncle had come back. There was no scent for him to go on, and he was probably as annoyed as me. That last memory we had begun to see before Reginald and Eldridge unleashed chaos, showed that they were planning an attack on us. That was another thing I wanted to know from the witches, who exactly was in on it. What were they planning, without even knowing the entire truth? Had Reginald made matters worse, or were they all simply in on this attack? I wouldn't relax until I knew what their reasons were for attacking. I knew Janina had mentioned it before, but still, I wanted the facts. If there was a way to stop it all, then we should take it, but the coven needed to weed out their toxic evil villains. Dulsanra was quiet, and I was staying quiet in case I flipped out. She had been reckless, so reckless. Magdalene and Edward were talking quietly, and despite being close by, I couldn't hear a word, probably a spell. "Can we talk?" Dulsanra whispered, placing her hand gently on my waist. I looked down at her and I swear my anger lessened considerably just by looking into those startling blue eyes of hers. I cupped her face, my other hand pulling her closer by the waist. Bending down slightly, I claimed her lips in a passionate, rough kiss, one that I knew held my frustration in it. But there was something so good about kissing her. She kissed me back, her arms locking around my neck, her hand twisting into my hair. Her lips fighting for dominance, something she could never win. I felt myself harden slightly against her, wanting to her right now. To release this frustration that was messing me up. Groaning lowly, I pulled away before I ended up supporting a full-on hard-on. "Sure, we can talk. Can we have everyone's attention?" Magdalene said clearly. "Let Dulsanra step forward and I myself will probe her mind." Dulsanra looked up at me, and I gave her a small nod, kissing her forehead. "Do you want everyone to see, or?" I asked softly. "I'm okay with them seeing," she said softly. "You got this," I said quietly, walking forward with her. "You know how the spell works, this won't take long," Magdalene said to Dulsanra, who simply nodded. I kissed her cheek from behind softly before moving back ever so slightly, my hands still firmly on her waist. No matter how annoyed I was at her recklessness, I couldn't part with her. I was going to be right here for my kitten. Magdalene whispered the spell, and soon memories of long ago began to play. From the lower angle, I could tell this was Dulsanra as a child. "You stupid!" Another girl, I recognized as Amaria, scoffed. She herself was clearly under 10, "Please don't hurt me." A child's voice whimpered. My kitten's voice. One that tugged at my heart. "You are a monster!" Amaria hissed, before she began hitting Dulsanra. Magdalene frowned deeply as the scene shifted. This time, Dawson and Amaria were beating her together, whilst Elena drank tea, ignoring them. The next one was of Samson dragging her by her hair and throwing her against the wall. Dawson touching her, telling her that one day he'd be using her. I couldn't watch this, I felt sick. My anger was beginning to grow and Magdalene motioned for me to move back. I shook my head, trying to control myself for Dulsanra, because no matter how angry I was, I couldn't leave her. I closed my eyes, my hands tightening around her waist. The next memory was of a screaming Dulsanra as she was doused in scalding water. My eyes blazed and all I wanted was to tear every member of this coven to shreds. I felt a hand on my shoulder, snapping me from my thoughts. I turned sharply only to see Uncle Al, his brows furrowed. "She's strong, so be strong for her," he said through the link. As Alpha King, he could link other alphas. I simply small nod, I was trying. His hand never left my shoulder, and despite my anger that was consuming me, I fought my instincts. The memories only got worse, and I could tell Magdalene was getting paler. Her lips pressed in a tight line, and her nostrils flared. Dulsanra's brother was watching too, looking confused. Many looked ashamed, whilst others simply looked uncomfortable. Dulsanra whimpered, and I pulled her close. "Is this hurting her?" "I'm just probing past the spell that Amaria seemed to have cast," Magdalene said quietly. Her voice seemed to lose some of that hostile tone it had held not long ago. The next one was Dulsanra being sold off to someone as she screamed after her father. The next one was her being beaten by the man who wanted her to bring his wife back from the dead. I couldn't look at this any longer. My heart was racing. I just watched Dulsanra, who was simply calm. "Is she okay?" I growled. "I've made sure she cannot see what I am probing and seeing. It's clear that it was the wise thing to do. She has suffered." "Suffered is an understatement," Uncle growled. "She was a kid who you should have taken care of." "We did not know. A leader should know what's happening," he hissed. I didn't say anything. The urge to show them hell by tearing them limb from limb and making them feel the pain was growing. The scene changed, and I realized these were werewolves. "Enough," I said. "I didn't want everyone to see her tied up. When it comes to your own, I will handle them. I don't want her to be seen in this state," I said quietly. "Understood," Magdalene replied. She was about to end the spell when Uncle cut in. "Hold that," he said, suddenly staring at the memory that surrounded us. "I know that face." I looked up, seeing that it was one of the werewolves who was throwing a dagger. My heart was racing. Uncle frowned. "I don't know. It isn't a alpha, but I've seen that one and the third in the back. Then it seems she has suffered from wolves who were under your leadership too," Magdalene said coldly. "We know and I'm dealing with it," I replied venomously. "Oh, we will," Uncle said coldly. "See if you can get any more faces. Skip that memory. Can you change the spells so not everyone can see them?" I asked quietly. She looked around, and Janina stepped forward. "I'll cast a cloaking spell, may I see too?" she asked. I looked around, hesitantly. "Fine, just the five of us," I said glancing at Edward, Uncle, and the two witches. Magdalene nodded and the memory shifted again. Any annoyance I had felt towards my kitten was gone. The suffering she had been through was painful. In the next memory, we couldn't see anything properly. Her screams pierced the air before she was choked off, and I could tell she was drowning from the way her voice was coming. I felt cold. Was that what I thought it was? Waterboarding, Uncle's disgusted voice came. Suddenly light surrounded her and she lay on a dark, wet floor, coughing and gasping for air. A voice came in the dark. It was far and hazy, but I knew it was because she was half out of it. She cried out as the man began kicking her. I turned my head away. How much had she gone through that I didn't even know? Edward was shaking and Janina had a hand to her throat, taking deep breaths. The next memory showed a cold, dark room. Her whimpers and shuddering breaths told me she was scared and in pain. I could see her legs covered in cuts and blood coming out of them. Well. It looks like you are still being a little peesh. You are just dirt. A man growled. His voice seemed distantly familiar, but I wasn't sure where I had heard it. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to focus, yet it was his next act that made my mind go blank. Now you know the drill, right, Peesh? Dulsanra didn't say anything. My heart was pounding, not knowing what was coming, only to see in the darkness of the room as he started urinating on her. I closed my eyes as Magdalene cut the memory in a sharp breath. All five of us couldn't even string two words together. It had been too painful. Rayhan the elders and Janina were in tears, my own eyes burning with pain, anger, and sorrow. I pulled Dulsanra into my arms, kissing her forehead softly. Her eyes were still glazed as Uncle cleared his throat. I glanced at him as I hugged my precious snowflake tightly. To my surprise, his eyes were glittering with unshed tears. Dust! He muttered, unable to look me in the eye as he turned away. I couldn't say anything, kissing my kitten gently. She had been through so much. When I find them, they're dead. My heart was racing, and I felt sick to my stomach. She blinked, her eyes fluttering open. She's been through far too much, at the hands of both our kinds. I think there are many things that are needed to be done, Edward said gravely. Janina nodded, undoing her spell, and Edward turned to the crowd gathered around. This is the doings of our people, of our elders. Return to your homes, we will decide on the true punishment for those who have committed these heinous crimes, as well as what is to be done from here. Magdalene said. There's also the fact that the Coven is planning an attack on werewolves, Dulsanra said. Unlike the five of us who needed time to come to terms with what we had seen, she was her usual strong self. We want answers, Dulsanra said, glancing at me. I couldn't let on that I was still reeling with what she had gone through, so I turned to Magdalene. Yeah, we know you're planning an attack on our kind, so I want to know why? 3 years ago, it was witches who attacked us, but we didn't class the entire species as our enemies. Care to share why you think it's okay to prepare to attack us? I asked icily, trying to push those memories from my head. Spoken like a true alpha. Uncle added. Because of the witches your people are hunting, Magdalene said, sighing. They are a group of werewolves, not the entire kind, Dulsanra said quietly. My love, a werewolf, is the one who has protected me. I have been hurt by both sides. Does that mean we should wage war on all witches? The thing is, this is going to lead to more bloodshed. How about you contact your higher UPS, fill them in, and then I have a proposal. I said clearly. My voice was calm, yet the power that I emitted meant business. My eyes met Magdalene, before she sighed, nodding, and looked at Edward. Very well, let's do that. Dulsanra. The moment Magdalene walked off after saying that we all needed to eat something and rest while she called for a meeting, Ames approached us hesitantly. Dulsanra, he said, looking up at Rayhan, who glared back coldly. I could sense Rayhan's anger and hostility, but also Ames' guilt and pain. Let's walk, I said softly. I looked up at Rayhan. He gave a small nod and was about to walk off when I grabbed his hand. The three of us. If he could involve me in everything to do with his family, then I am going to do the same. Even if he was mad at me. His grey eyes looked into mine, and he reached over, running his fingers through my hair before he kissed my lips deeply, his other hand on the small of my back as he pressed me into him. We broke apart after a few moments and I looked at Ames. Come on, I said. He fell in step with me. His gaze kept going to Rayhan, whose hand never left my waist. Looking up at him, I tried picturing him from his point of view. He walked with an arrogance and dominance. His eyes were intense and his entire posture, the aura that rolled off of him, he radiated power. He was the ultimate alpha, and with it, my core knotted and my cheeks burned. God, he was so. I quickly looked away. Ames, my mate, or you can say my partner Rayhan Rossi. Rayhan, my younger brother Ames, the only one who ever cared for me. I said quietly. Although things had changed between us, he was still my brother. Rayhan gave him a nod and Ames returned it hesitantly. One who seems to have been manipulated. Ames murmured sorrowfully. Don't blame yourself. When I was brought back, I knew you had probably been spelled. I said softly, reaching out. I took his hand. You are the only biological sibling I have left. If you want, I'm sure we can get to know one another. He glanced at Rayhan, who kissed my neck, sending off a rush of tingles. I'll give you two a little space, Rayhan said, moving away from us. I'd like that, Ames said, watching Rayhan, who had stopped a few meters away. Dulsanra, are you sure it's safe to be around him? I smiled gently. Safe? Safe? Ames, he is my safe place. I have never seen happiness in my life until I met him. But Dulsanra, he's a werewolf. His kind are beasts no matter what we say. How can you trust him? I wanted to get angry, but how can I? When I myself had said so much hurtful stuff to Rayhan. Despite him standing a distance away, I knew he was hearing this crystal clear. Because he wanted me when the world wanted me dead, he fought for me when I myself gave up. He protected me when I needed someone. He is my life, my world, and my alt Ames. I can't imagine life without Rayhan. You saw what I have been through, right? Well, my every happiness is tied to him. Thanks to him, I got a family to call my own, friends, respect. He gave me more than I ever could have hoped for, and above all, he loves me, and I love him. I said softly. I heard Rayhan in a breath, knowing my words affected him too, but they were the truth. Ames stayed silent for a moment before he gave a crooked smile. If I had an argument ready, it's gone. We've never given you anything but pain, and if someone can make you that happy. I mean, you look so much better than you used to. I'm glad you found a home, Dulsanra, a family to call your own. He said wryly. I smiled sadly. Why did this feel like a goodbye? But even if Elder Magdalene agrees to withdraw the battle plans, I don't think I can associate with their kind. He said quietly. I felt a dull ache inside, but I got it. We just weren't meant to be able to fix that bond. So, you will cut all ties with me too? I asked. No. I mean, Mom abandoned me too. Dad's dead, Amaria's dead. I know they were horrible to you and I hate them for it, but it's going to take me time to get myself figured out. He looked pained, and I realized that he must have known that I killed Samson. I mean, I did it there in front of everyone. In the end, I was the sister who ran away from home to him. Even if they had been awful towards me, they had been good towards him. That's fine, I don't mind if you don't want to stay in touch, Ames. I'm just glad you are okay. I said, giving him a fake smile that I knew looked genuine enough. He shook his head, taking my hand, to my surprise. I want to stay in touch with you, Dulsanra. When you go back, I still don't want to cut everything off. If you want, we could exchange numbers. That would be great. I said softly, seeing a small ray of hope. I get that I was never going to have this perfect relationship with Ames, but that was okay too. Great. He said, dropping my hand. We smiled at each other, and I turned to Rayhan just as he turned back. Our eyes met, and he gave me a small smile that washed away any sadness that had settled inside of me. He held his hand out to me and I walked over to him, taking his outstretched hand. My gaze fell on it and I smiled at the differences in the size of our hands. I raised his hand to my lips, kissing it softly, before holding it to my chest. I'm sorry for turning off. Forgive me. I asked softly. He raised an eyebrow. No need to apologize, but I'm still mad. He whispered, his eyes glinting, and I pouted. Well, there's nothing more I can do to, I trailed off. Oh, I knew a few ways to get rid of his anger. I blushed lightly. My head had become so dirty. I blame him. He made me think dirty little things I wanted to do. I became serious once again, looking up at him. His smile had faded too. Kitten. You're my all. I cannot lose you. Please, before doing anything recklessly, remember that your life is tied to mine. If you get hurt, it hurts me way more. I sighed. I get it. I'll try not to do that next time, but have faith in me, Rayhan, I can handle this. I said softly. I know, but this wolf will always worry about his little kitty cat. He said with a smirk. I smiled. I know he will, and because of that, I would be careful. Not only for him but for me too, because I wanted to spend many more years with my Yum Yum. Guys, there's food, that we've checked, it's all edible, and then the meeting's going to start in 30 minutes. Lola said, coming over. She was dressed in some pants and an oversized top. We nodded and followed her. The sun was now high in the sky, shining bright like a beacon of hope, and I hoped that a solution was found. Rayhan, we were all seated in the large drawing room of Magdalene's home. It was just several members of the coven. Clearly, it wasn't an open event. A large screen had been connected to the heads of the coven in Salem. 3 elders were sitting there, each one emotionless, yet you could tell they were not pleased. Magdalene had already filled them in on everything before we had even entered. When we had come in, we had taken our seats. Rayhana was sitting next to Chris, and although I had no idea what went down between the two that night of the barbecue, one thing I was sure of, something had happened. There was an understanding between them, yet at the same time, I saw the fact that they wanted one another, but clearly weren't going for that. I sat back, and now all eyes turned on me. You had a proposal, Alpha Rayhan. Magdalene said, her eyes flittering to Uncle. Despite knowing he was the king, it was clear he was just going to watch in with minimum input. I get that there's a group out there that's hunting witches, but there are also witches killing werewolves. However, we can't judge every single witch or werewolf down to these 2 groups, can we? It's probably Reginald. Who is targeting the wolves? Someone inputted. Maybe, let him continue. One of the men on the video call said coldly. I don't know what the situation is with America and your agreement or condition there, but if the new council here in the UK is free of corruption and are willing to agree to the offer that I put on the table, it's simple. We won't interfere in your lives, you won't interfere in ours. We will make sure our people know that we are at peace with yours, and you will do the same. And if anyone who breaks these rules will be trialed and held responsible for their crap, because we all know that every species has monsters. We have had our fair share of them, and I am sure we saw earlier today that even you had a lot of snakes in your midst. I said clearly. My eyes flitted from one council member to the next, making sure they all understood what I was saying. How can we know you will uphold your promise? One of the elders spoke. I looked at the screen, my eyes flashing green. If I wanted you all dead, you would be. Trust me, despite that it may have been unknowingly, you all let an innocent child suffer under your protection. So, you really don't have much scope for arrogance. We are looking past your mistakes and trying to help both sides. Take it or leave it. Because if it's war you want, we're ready for it. And don't forget, this time, the werewolves will have witches on their side. Rayhana added. Is that a threat? One of the men said, looking at Rayhana. If you want it to be. Put aside your ego and decide what is best for your people. I said, sitting back, placing my arm around my kitten's slender shoulders. After what I saw, what Reginald has done to the castle, breached our defenses and left us literally for dead, they need to be tracked and held responsible. Everything we learned from Janina, Dulsanra, and the Alpha, it's clear that many crimes have been committed under our noses. For the betterment of our people, a peace treaty sounds fair. Edward said. The 3 men seemed to be deep in thought for a moment before nodding curtly. When you were sent to England, I gave Reginald the reins to be in charge. With him gone, it is in your hands, Magdalene. Choose your counsel and the decision is yours. One of them said. If you think a treaty is better than war with the wolves, then so be it. Do they guarantee their people won't attack? As I said, you have our word. I said firmly. I can vouch that they keep their words, even though I dislike them. Janina added. The men now turned to her before Uncle sat forward taking a drag on a cigarette that I had no idea where he got from. I give you my word too, I'm behind the future alpha of the Black Storm Pack. Uncle added. The men nodded slowly. Very well then, and what of you, Janina Silver? Despite it all, things are cleared, you should return to the coven. I don't think so, I will be leaving, I mean we need members on this council who can be trusted, Janina, we were once friends. Don't you think you could stick around and help rebuild this coven and to make sure the same things do not happen again? Magdalene asked, frowning. Janina frowned, and I knew she was considering it. There should be rules and regulations for everything to be clear and elders being chosen wisely. The fact that this council had several corrupt members at the head is disgusting. She said coldly. Reginald was smart, he chose some of those members. You can't blame us for that. One of the men on the screen snapped, clearly offended by her words. A true leader accepts their mistakes. Dulsanra said confidently. She had been fairly quiet observing and listening, but now she stared at the men on the screen firmly. The thing is, you let it slide, surely there were red flags, Elder Dylan. I personally remember pleading with you at one point to not send me home with Samson. A lot needs to be changed within your system. Make those changes, accept your wrongs and either take control, or I'm sure there are many that can take the position as leaders and actually do good for their people. She said, frowning slightly. The man on the left clenched his jaw, and the one in the middle raised an eyebrow. We will conduct a clear out here too. Magdalene, Edward, I will leave the rest to you. When you find Reginald and the others, they will be trialed, they won't be alive to be trialed. When I get my hands on them, they're dead. I said coldly, my eyes flashed green as once again anger flared inside of me. Rayhana's slight tense silence fell until the men nodded. Very well, if he is found alive then. They soon signed off, and we were getting ready to leave after finishing off the discussions about the planned attack. You have our word, we will not attack. What Reginald was planning was regarding the dead witches. However, like you said, the witch hunters are a small part. If we are attacked, we will attack too. Yeah, attack those who attack you, not innocents. Uncle growled. Moreover, if you do find anything on the hunters, let us know. We will also keep you updated on anything we find, whether it's the escaped witches or the werewolf group. I said quietly. Magdalene nodded as Janina gave a few suggestions, before we finally got up to leave. So, we won't see you again? Rayhana asked Janina. Of course we shall. However, there's a lot of work here that needs doing, so no one suffers again. Janina said, her eyes flicking to Dulsanra, and I realized that no matter how uncaring she acted, there was definitely a bond there. So is our teachings done? Rayhana asked, arm ciosed. It was obvious she had grown attached. A witch's teaching is never complete, we will still arrange rendezvous. And I'm sure the coven can lend you both some spell books. Janina said, looking at Magdalene, who nodded. Perhaps you can come for some summer camps to learn too. You are both witches from high houses. She said. You both have a legacy. Our only legacy is the one we will create for our own future. Not one that we have inherited or expected to. Dulsanra said, her eyes flashing confidently. We will consider the lessons. However, we won't be tied to this coven. Let Serafina speak for herself, dear. Edward said, looking disappointed at Dulsanra's statement. I pulled her into my arms, smirking slightly as Rayhana raised an eyebrow. My girl has said what I was thinking. We shall see, and yet, any place that has tortured my brother's mate to such an extreme extent is not somewhere that I would ever want to be part of. She said haughtily. Chris smirked. Guess that gave you your answer. He remarked. Lola simply shook her head, satisfied with the girl's comments. Maybe one day this place will be different, and I truly hope it is, but until then. Dulsanra left her words hanging as she turned to Janina. Thank you for everything. No need to thank me. Janina said curtly. Dulsanra smiled before both women gave each other a smile and she turned to me. Our eyes met and I realized it was finally time to go home. I held my hand out to her, and she smiled, taking it as I led her out of there. Things were not over, but we were getting there. Well, I'm done with this right now, I'm missing my nympho. Uncle said as we walked through the woods, heading out of the witch's territory. The sun was setting, casting soft hues through the trees. A soft breeze blew and one would never imagine that something had happened around here only hours earlier. And the babies. Honestly, I am still mad there was an entire baby bash and I didn't get to go. Rayhana said with a pout. You didn't miss, just annoying women cooing over those two hoodwinkers. Uncle Al said. Already bullying them, Uncle? Or just scared knowing they will have you wrapped around their thumb? I remarked smirking. That aren't happening. Uncle Al growled. Oh, I was sure it was happening. They are Rossi princesses, I'm sure they will definitely have the upper hand. Chris added, making Rayhana's heart race. Something everyone clicked onto. The king's sharp eyes went to hers calculatingly. Yet and the blood moon is coming. What's the chances you're going to meet your mate? Uncle asked, glancing at her. She shrugged despite the fact her heart hadn't stilled. Who knows? Well, he better treat you good, whoever he is, or I'll be tearing him to shreds before he can even say the words mine. I smirked at that and Dulsanra smiled, amused. Is the blood moon going to be held at your pack? She asked Uncle. It was meant to, but with just having the twins, I'm not going to risk her dealing with extra. That makes sense. Dulsanra said with a nod. RAF said he'll be hosting it. Guess you guys didn't know since you been out here for so long. He then looked at me. Cut that hair. What are you planning? To keep it long like Rapunzel? Uncle said, looking at me. I smirked, raising an eyebrow. The fact that you know who Rapunzel is, kind of worries me. Uncle, I mean, are you into Disney? No, Uncle growled as the rest broke into snickers, or well, in Dulsanra and Rayhana's case, full-out laughter. Our eyes met and I smirked at him. I had to admit, No matter how much we argued and didn't agree, we were still family and had each other's back. Uncle's closet Disney fan. Rayhana teased. Still, that hair is way too long. Or you're jealous. I shot back. I think his hair looks incredibly handsome, Dulsanra said, running her fingers through my hair. Yeah, well, any longer and he'll be outdoing yours, Uncle remarked. Dulsanra pouted. That's true, and it's so glossy. Come on, kitten, we can all agree you're way more beautiful than I am, I said, pulling her close and kissing her lips. The sweet, tempting taste of her mouth was just perfect. Want us to answer that? Chris added with a smirk. I shot him a glare, and Dulsanra smiled. I disagree, she said softly, caressing my jaw before kissing me again. We always will, I said softly before scooping her up bridal style. She shrieked in alarm. Locking her arms around my neck, I kissed her, looking into those startling blue eyes. Seeing her happy, reminded me of how different she was when I first found he. She had come a long way, she had opened up and she was finally living the life she deserved. Dulsanra, we were finally home, and even the king said he would stop by to see Papa Raf. Although I was quite surprised since he said he missed his family. My heart was pounding as I looked at the huge mansion, home. But were we welcomed? The renovations were done and no reminder of what took place remained. Lola and Chris had headed home too, and now the four of us were headed towards the entrance of the mansion. Come on, kitten, Rayhan said, his arm around my waist. My heart was racing, and I wasn't sure what his mom would think. Especially after everything that happened. Although Rayhan said she was okay. I held Rayhana's hand tightly, her heart was beating louder than a drum, and the king sidestepped forward, walking to the entrance. He did the doorbell. The door instantly opened to reveal Papa Raf and Maria. Long time no see him, the king said, giving his brother a manly hug. Papa Raf chuckled and hugged him back. It's been a while, but for you to realize that, I feel honored, he said. My eyes were glued on Maria's, who was staring at Rayhana, guilt, sadness, and relief rolling off her. Her eyes sparkled ever so slightly with unshed tears, but it was clear she was remaining composed. She stepped forward gracefully, her heart beating fast despite how composed she was acting. Rayhana, she whispered. I let go of her hand, my own heart beating as I looked at the woman who had become my best friend. Mom, Rayhana said softly. It was Maria who closed the gap between them and hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I am so sorry. I know it won't take away what I did, but I'm so sorry ya habits, she said, kissing her daughter's cheek. Rayhana broke into tears, hugging her mom tightly. My own tears stung my eyes. A mother's love. My own mother came to my mind, and instantly, Rayhan hugged me tightly, as if shielding me from everything. I closed my eyes, calming myself. Dulsanra. Maria's voice made my eyes open. Rayhan slowly released me and I turned towards his mother. Rayhana was hugging Papa Raf as I looked into the grey eyes of Rayhan's mother. Welcome home, Dulsanra, she said gently. Thank you, I said, as she hugged me tightly. I am sorry, she said softly in my ear. It's okay, I said, hugging her back. I was glad she was ready to accept us. Even if it took time, or even if it took even longer, Rayhana and I would show her that we were not evil like those witches that killed her loved ones. We moved apart and Papa Raf enveloped me in a big hug. I am glad you are home, he said, smiling down at me. I smiled. I am too. I heard Maria asking Rayhan for forgiveness too. I turned and watched him hug his mother, a soft smile on his face. God, he was handsome. You're not mad at me, are you? Maria asked him. How can I stay mad at the woman who brought me onto this earth? Rayhan asked softly, kissing his mother's head. Oh, you can if she ends up being a psycho. The king muttered to Papa Raf. Well, Andorra was a rare evil species, he replied as we all walked inside. So, her link to Rayhana is broken. Is there any chance she can come back? Maria asked, the worry still clear in her voice. No. I made Sue to send her to hell. There is no way she can return any longer. Rayhana gave up the link to her witch ancestors. No one can summon Andorra anymore. I made sure of it. I said firmly. I guess the Rossi men needed mates who could deal with Andorra. Rayhana remarked. I smiled. I knew how Kiera had played a huge part in that battle. Well, all of you go get dressed into something pretty, I have had a delicious meal prepared. Maria said gently. I can't wait to bathe. Rayhana said, and she was gone in a flash. I think we won't see her for at least 2 hours. Rayhan remarked. Probably not. Let's say dinner in 2 hours then. Papa Raf said. Rayhan smirked. Perfect. He replied before pulling me up the stairs. Leaving the two brothers chuckling, my cheeks burned. Rayhan. I hissed. What? I just want to actually be alone with you. He said, opening the bedroom door. He pulled me, kicking it shut and pushing me up against it. I smiled. Oh really? Why? I asked, batting my lashes innocently. He smirked. How about I show you? He asked. Before I could even reply, his lips crashed against mine. His hand slipped under my top. Sparks rushed through me as his fingers grazed my skin, making me sigh softly against him. We made out like there was no tomorrow, but despite his hard-on that was pressed against my stomach, he didn't go further, knowing we had been through a lot. Finally, when he forced himself back breathing hard, he lifted me up by the back and carried me to the bed. Rayhan. I said, kissing his sore-looking lips as he dropped onto the bed. Yeah kitten. How come you weren't part of that battle 3 years ago? I asked. It was something that had never really been discussed thoroughly. He sighed deeply, his brows furrowed, adjusting his position against the headboard. We didn't know what the outcome will be. Dad, Uncle, and Marcel were all ready to face Andorra. We weren't sure on the survival rate. Dad and Uncle didn't want me there just in case both of them didn't make it. He said quietly. My eyes widened in shock, my heart thumping. You mean they weren't sure they would win? More like if they'd survive, they were hell-bent on winning, but the cost could have been anything. If anything was to happen to them, I was to take their place as the king of alphas and the alpha of both packs. he said quietly. I hadn't known this, and I had a feeling no one much did. No one knew. Uncle and Dad had put me as the heir to everything, if went down. But wasn't Kiera pregnant with Dante? Yet, but if I was a stand-in, he would still be a target. So, I would have taken the title completely and I would have given it to Dante in the future. Marcel's son was only 9. If all 3 died, it would have fallen on me, although Kiera is an alpha female. The dangers of being king are huge. Uncle is the only Lycan in existence, even abroad there's no other. The fact he had got every pack in this country under his reign makes those abroad fear him. I simply listened, thinking how far the Rossi brothers had been willing to go for their people. That was the ultimate difference between our species. The Rossis really are something else. I said, kissing his neck, right over his mark softly. Satisfied when he groaned gently. I laughed lightly. Come on, my big wolf, let's get ready for dinner. I don't want to disappoint your mom. You won't because you are perfect. I smiled, kissing him softly before I climbed off of him and walked off to the bathroom first. An hour and a half later, I was dressed in the powder blue sequined dress that his mother had gotten for me. It had long sleeves and a very daring neckline. Maria definitely knew her stuff. Rayhana had come and done my makeup, and I really don't get why it had to be so much. I looked like I was about to go to a party. The only jewelry I wore was the bracelet Rayhan had gifted me on our first date, one that I hadn't removed at all, although the long sleeves covered it. Along with a pair of dangly earrings that Rayhana had forced me to put on. I had dried my hair using a spell that I found after skimming through one of the 4 grimoires that we had been given by the coven on the journey back. Although most of their books were buried under the rubble, these were from Magdalene's home. Rayhana had said my natural hair looked good enough before thrusting a pair of glittering silver heels in my hands and left to get ready herself. I was admiring my nails that she had painted a glittering silver when the bathroom door opened and Rayhan stepped out, looking cute in black jeans, a white top and his wet hair was pulled back into a tie. His eyes trailed over me, the intensity making my stomach knot. He smelled incredible, his usual intoxicating scent mixed with designer fragrance. Goddess! My fiery snowflake looks so good, he said, as I stood up and did a slow turn running my fingers through my hair. Good enough. That's an understatement, he said quietly, pulling me against him and kissing me once again. 10 minutes later, we had finally made it downstairs, only to see Rayhana was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, clearly having just come down. Oh, it's outside, she said, fixing her long hair. She looked stunning in a silk-fitted dress. Her makeup was full too, the highlighter and contour just like mine, and I felt relieved. Her expensive fragrance filled my nose. You look gorgeous, I said to her. You look well, hun, she said excitedly. How come it's outside? I asked, as we walked to the back. No idea, Mom said the weather's nice. Rayhana said. Rayhan remarked as we pushed open the door, and I stopped in my tracks. The garden was decorated lavishly with garlands, some fairy lights and lanterns. Soft music began playing, and there were lots of people there. Many pack members were there, if not all. Oh wow! The entire place was packed. The king was standing there with his arms around Kiara from behind, his head buried into her. A stunning woman with red hair was holding a newborn baby whilst a man had his arms around her as he stood by Papa Raf, who was holding a young girl around Dante's age with gorgeous black hair. Luna Maria was holding another baby and Dante was running around. Even Alpha Amir and Marcel were there. Lola, Rose, and Chris were stood to the side, smiles on their faces, and all eyes were now on us. Or on me. Surprise! Rayhan whispered, making me stare at him. He kissed my lips softly, before moving back. Welcome to the family, kitten. Rayhan, she looked breathtaking. From the moment I stepped out of that bathroom, I wanted to pin her to the bed until we both could no longer move. Mom had chosen a dress that went perfectly with her eye color, leaving her legs all on display. But as much as I wanted to spend the night her, that option was not something that was possible right now. My baby girl was going to be initiated into the pact tonight, and although we could have kept it small, everyone wanted to see the future Luna, and Mom had wanted to do this for her. I knew she and Rayhana had had a word earlier, and Mom had apologized for her behavior. She didn't sugarcoat anything, saying that she was still scared of witches, but she was going to be more open-minded and remember that Dulsanra and Rayhana weren't the same as those who had hurt our kind. That she loved them both and would do her best to make up for her ignorance. I was glad that most people were more accepting thanks to Dad's way of explaining stuff. He is the type of person who can get through to anyone, and with his good nature, not many people were able to refuse him. The moment my kitten saw everyone in the garden, her eyes flew open in shock. Surprise, I whispered, making her snap her gaze towards me, her plump lips begging to be kissed. I leant down to kiss her back softly. Welcome to the family, kitten. This is for me? She asked, confused. Obviously, future Luna. Rayhana teased. I looked down at Dulsanra. With the silvery shimmer that coated her skin, making her cleavage glisten, to the shimmery smoky makeup and her pure white hair, it all reminded me of a winter queen. I pulled her against me, kissing her mark softly. I didn't care what she did, or said, I would never get angry at her again. What she had suffered. My wolf whimpered, growling lowly, and I knew, just like me, he was suffocating under the pain that our mate had endured. I wished that I had been the one to suffer instead of her. What hurt the most was that it was werewolves. Werewolves by far surpassed the pain that the coven caused her. Hey! Are you okay? She asked. I reined my emotions in and nodded. Come on over here, all of you. Dad said, smiling as he let Azura rain down. We began walking over to everyone, my eyes falling on my twin cousins. Ah, they are so cute. Dulsanra said after meeting Kiara with a hug. Thank you. Kiara replied as Dulsanra gushed over the baby in Mom's arms. I watched her. She seemed to like kids. Just then, Mom complimented her. You look beautiful, Dulsanra. Thank you, it's a little daring. You have exquisite taste. Dulsanra replied with a smile. Just don't tell my Baba I chose it. Mum whispered, making Dulsanra giggle. Do you want to hold her? Dulsanra looked up, her heart hammering. Can I? What if I drop her? You won't. Mom said confidently, before she passed her Skyla. The only way I could tell them apart was by the hair. Babies all look the same to me. She cradled her, holding her very carefully, kissing her forehead softly. She's gorgeous, and I love the names. She looks just like you, Kiera. Dulsanra said looking at Kiera. Thanks, Kiera replied with a small smile. They do. No uncle in them. Rayhana agreed, taking Catalia from Auntie Red. It's nice to meet you, Dulsanra. Auntie Red said, making Dulsanra freeze as she looked at the woman before her. I smiled slightly watching them. Both women had suffered, yet both remained strong. I knew my kitten had been through so much, but abuse was abuse. Both women were fighters. Nice to meet you too, Luna Scarlet, Kiera's mom, isn't it? Dulsanra replied with a small smile. It is, it's an honor to meet you. Auntie Red said as Uncle L stepped forward. Nice to meet you, Dulsanra, I've heard a lot about you. He said reaching over and rubbing the back of her head, before doing the same to Rayhana. I smirked. Old man. Alpha Elijah. You look like your son. Dulsanra said gently rocking the baby in her arms. My stomach nodded and I knew that when the time came, she'd make an amazing mom. We would have pups, but only if she wanted them. If she didn't, that was fine too. Because she had been through hell, and I was not going to push her into anything she didn't want. More like he looks like me, I'm surprised you saw him. He doesn't really mix. Uncle L said, frowning deeply. Not now, baby. Auntie Red murmured, turning and kissing his lips. Uncle L said. Ah, let's get selfies with the babies. I finally have girl cousins. Rayhana was saying. Yet, nothing special there. Uncle Al grumbled. Why? Worried they're going to meet mates like you. Uncle L said, arrogantly. They are not getting mates. Uncle shot back. Kiera sighed as Mom and Auntie Red smiled. Karma is a bitch. Uncle L said, taking a glass of wine from a passing waiter. Well, I'm sure their mates will be lovely, but they are only a few weeks handsome. Kiera added. Dulsanra walked over to me with Skyla and looked up at me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Look how adorable she is. It's the first time I'm holding a baby. She said, looking up at me. My chest tightened painfully. First time? She seemed to get my confusion and gave me that smile of hers that I could see right through. Back at the coven, I wasn't allowed near any of the children, even when Ames was little. She said, looking down at Skyla. I stepped back, feeling my resolve crack. My heart was threatening to break, and it was taking my all to keep myself together. The cheerful chatter, the upbeat music, the children laughing. Nothing helped. Excuse me, I need to make a call, I said, turning away. My eyes stung, but I knew I couldn't break down in front of her. I turned and walked off, away from the party and commotion, through the crowds, needing to be alone. Her words echoed in my head, and they hurt, so much. I walked around to the front, walking over to the fountain that sat there. I sat down on the stone edge, my head hanging as I took a deep breath. How much had she missed out on in life? Things we take for granted. Something so simple as carrying a child. I hated how much she had suffered. I wish I could do more. If I could, I'd turn back time for her. Drink. Uncle's voice brought me out of my thoughts. I turned away, not wanting him to see the unshed tears in my eyes. I took the glass he was shoving in my face before he sat down on the fountain edge too, taking a gulp of his own drink. It hurts, doesn't it? You don't know what you're talking about. I said quietly, not bothering to even taste the alcohol he had passed me. I do, but can I compare to your pain? No. What that girl's gone through was way more than even I could stomach. By our kind. When I find them, I want to torture them to the brink of their life, get Kiara to heal them and do it all again. Every time I see her, I feel weak. She has suffered so much as you said, but she didn't become bitter. She's stronger than anyone I know, me included. Way stronger. Uncle stopped, the pain in his voice was clear despite him trying his best to hide it. I glanced at him. To my surprise, his eyes didn't look much different than mine, and I realized I really wasn't feeling it all alone. To some level he understood. She is strong. But I don't want to pity her, she won't like it. I just wish I could give her every happiness she deserves. I said quietly, staring up at the night sky. Uncle chuckled dryly. She definitely will get that, she got you. We all know you're the perfect alpha, perfect man, and the type that any woman would be lucky to have. He said with a cold smirk. I scoffed, seriously uncle, we all know you're the lady killer. N.A., what women see in me is delusional. The idea of mine is probably appealing, but living with me 24/7, and dealing is not easy. Kiara's stuck with me, but she deserved so much better, no, I remarked. Still, women are crazy over you. Yeah, I'm the type that they want one night with, and you're the type that they want forever. So, let's not do this. Our mates love us. That's the most important part. He said, smirking. I nodded. Yeah, my kitten finally accepted me. Well yeah, who wants to see that scary face? I remarked. We both smirked before we became somber once again. Why did you follow me? Too much noise back there, and people love babies. I only enjoy the making babies part. Uncle said, making me smirk slightly. Yeah, think we all like that part. Silence fell and those painful memories filled my head. How many times had she suffered like that? Don't keep it inside. That isn't going to do anyone any good. Talk to her. He said quietly. I don't want her to know how I feel. She's been through so much. I don't want to add to her burden. I said quietly, looking down at the ice in my glass. It's not a burden. Dulsanra's soft voice came from behind me. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.